Well, today I'm happy to welcome Carissa Dunaway. Carissa is a UT grad. You were UT early 2000s, I believe.
Yep.
Is that right? Yeah. So, and then you spent really most of your career so far somewhere in the retirement and benefits space. Your current job is Director of Retirement Plans and Administration at Oak Ridge National Labs, and then I know that you spent a bit of time doing consulting type work in that same area, but before then for several years. So I think when we talk about retirement plans from a company's perspective, you're just right there in the middle of all of that, and that's basically your job, right? So this will be outstanding for our students. So thanks for joining us today. Glad to chat with you. We'll hear a little more about your story later, but let's just start by just kind of talking about retirement plans from the provider's standpoint and kind of how they work. So can you talk a little bit about the way that industry works?
Yeah, absolutely. So the majority of people probably listening to this call will only have experience with defined contribution plans, otherwise known as 401ks. So those are your participants defer in, your company will then match what you defer. You may find some where you don't have to defer in at all and your company's just going to give you a match. But that's really where the world is going. There are some industries out there right now, Oak Ridge National Lab being one of them. Your cities, your utilities, that you may still find defined benefit plans. Those defined benefit plans are based on a formula. So based on your pay, how many years you've worked, and a percentage. And so that's going to pay you for life versus your defined contribution plans, where if you don't put anything in that, you're not going to retire. There's the huge difference between the two. And some of you may get lucky and you may get both, like the lab has right now. So we still have an open defined benefit plan, and we have a DC match plan. So that's the basis. There are hundreds of other different types of plans out there, not necessarily hundreds, but different ways you can work these plans. But those are your two basics that you'll run into in the industry.
And so, so when I think of this, I think we, just to kind of remember how all these things, these work, both of them have the name, the word defined in the title, right? And so kind of the toggle switch here is the plan is set up so that one thing or another is defined. Either the definition is based on what goes in, or the definition is based on what comes out at retirement. And so that's where the defined benefit and the defined contribution comes in, right? Defined contribution means the plan is defining what is contributed to the plan on the front end. And so that's why you said, if you don't put anything in, you don't retire with anything. And so that builds, and then whatever you have after when you leave the employer, that's what you have left. Conversely, the defined benefit, I guess that's something that people would think about as these I guess an old school pension plan, right? So what is defined there is, and you mentioned a formula, is what someone will get when they retire. Well, in your experience, going back to consulting, I know that education was kind of a big role that you played there. Was it common for you to talk to employees and they knew they had a retirement plan, but they didn't know from the beginning if it was defined benefit or defined contribution?
Absolutely. One of the biggest issues is the terminology. If we used strictly the word defined benefit and defined contribution, it probably would be a lot easier for people to understand. But we don't. We use 401k. It's so confusing. And I even had some clients, and I won't name any names, that called their 401k plan, and this was the employer, called it a pension. And so there was so much confusion with just terminology and what do I have? And even when you say 401k plan, there is the lack of knowledge on what does that mean. So it's a lot of people would think, oh, it's my parents. They had this retirement plan and they retired and they're getting a paycheck for life. And so there was no communication on, well, why is that? And there was just the assumption that, well, that's what I have now. And so that lack of education was not there. And you look back to the history of this, we started out with defined benefit plans. That's what companies had. Then back in the 70s, they added 401k plans as a supplement to the defined benefit plans. Well, employers were starting to think, well, hey, this is kind of a neat little tool to use. This DB plan over here, this defined benefit plan, is really expensive. Let's just switch over here to this. And they did that. They turned off those pension plans, those DB plans, switched to just 401k plans, but failed to communicate to the population on what they were doing. And so there were, back when I was doing education, I traveled around the country, and I would do investment reviews for the plan sponsor, but then I would also stick around and do education pieces for those the participants to communicate to them what their plan was. And there's just so much confusion and lack of understanding of, oh, you mean I have to contribute? And also, there's a disconnect. You get hired in, and you can remember this, you get hired into a new employer, and that first day you are slammed with so much information. And that retirement discussion is 2 minutes probably in that new employee orientation. And really, depending on what age you are or where you are in life, you're focused on the health insurance. You're not listening to retirement. Oh, I'm 20. That's at 65. Why do I need to listen to this right now? And so there is a lack of education up front that makes it difficult. And it's really hard to get people to sit down and talk about it too, because it doesn't apply to right now.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my sense is in many situations, that initial decision that one makes on which, if there is an option between DB and DC, that initial decision one makes, that is potentially irrevocable. Is that right? That's you make this decision once, and that's the path you're on.
Usually, very rarely do you have a decision between DB and DC at the onset. It's either you have one or the other, or you have both. Some plans have hybrid. Okay. I think the state of Tennessee is a hybrid to where you pick between the. That's rare, but most of the time you're in a DB plan, you don't have a choice. And some of them are contributory. Our plan is contributory, so you don't have a choice in that. You do have a choice on the DC plan, but what I will is inertia happen. So you get in, you're automatically enrolled in that 1K defined contribution plan. You choose 1% because that's what the form tells you to do. You can contribute. We're going to automatically enroll you at 1%. These participants think they're the experts. They've set that up. That must be all I need to do. They set it up and they don't think about it. And then they come to age 55 and they're like, I'm thinking about retirement. Well, I'm sorry, you have $20,000 in your account because you never looked at it. You never changed your contribution percentage. So yeah, it's a big deal. Now there's features, auto escalation, that you're starting to see a lot of companies utilize. I think it's a great tool because it forces, and so what that means is you enroll someone at 1%, and every year you increase that at that participant's anniversary date, a percentage point, until you reach up to whatever your 6% or 10%. And then it stops auto escalating. And what that does is that allows those people to go do their job. They don't have to focus on what I need to save for retirement. It's automatic for them if they forget, because they do forget.
Well, so I want to go back to something that you just mentioned earlier. So you said, for example, you start someone at 1%. So let's just be clear what we're talking about. That percentage you're talking about is the percentage of one's paycheck that they siphon off to and this is in the defined contribution. space. So that's the precision that the percentage that they siphon off. But I think it's interesting when that piece of paper that has like a default number, say it's 1%. It's very easy for someone to see that and take that as a recommendation. And so just to be clear, that is not a recommendation, correct?
No, it is not a recommendation.
And that number is going to differ across companies, right? Because some companies may say, we're going to contribute 8% and you contribute another 8% as the default. And others may say, we're going to contribute 1 and you're going to contribute 0. That's a strategic decision that the company itself makes. And that's a benefit that they are choosing to offer.
Yeah. So two different parts there. So the match, what the company chooses to match, doesn't necessarily tie to what the auto enrollment percentage is. And 9 out of 10 times has the company sat down and strategically thought that through. We're starting to see this trajectory of employers getting more involved, thinking about this area more, because you've got to remember that the majority of the retirement plan is ran out of HR, and HR has hundreds of things to focus on, where it's very rare. Oak Ridge National Lab has a defined retirement area, and so that is our sole focus. We have strategic time to sit down and plan and think, okay, what we auto enroll someone probably should match what the company contribution is, but you're not going to have that connection 9 out of 10 times. It is literally, I don't want to upset my employees. I'm going to put the lowest deferral amount there so they don't get upset, and maybe they'll see it's not a lot of their paycheck, and then they'll go and change it. That is the mindset as a consultant that I heard on the other side of the table.
Yeah. So just to be clear, you're speaking about kind of what many companies do.
Yes.
You're not talking about policy in your current job.
No.
Okay.
What a lot of companies do.
Yeah. So I think it's interesting to think about this shift though from DB to DC industry wide, because in a defined benefit plan, in both plans, money is invested in the plan, and someone's got to manage that, and then those funds pay for the retirement stream for the plan participants. But in the DB case, it's ultimately the company's or the provider's responsibility to manage that money and ensure that the right amount's coming in and that it's invested in a way that it takes care of the liabilities. And if it doesn't, ultimately the employer, it's a liability to the employer. So there's a lot of employer responsibility there. But now as we shift into this DC space, the responsibility largely lands on the employee.
Yeah, it does. It's a lot easier to go to work every day and say, okay, I have a defined benefit. I know this is what I'm going to get through retirement. I don't have to worry about investing. It's wonderful for the participant. For the employer, as you said, it's a huge liability. You have to make sure that you're meeting those liabilities with your asset returns and what you're investing in. And so it's a whole different focus. Whereas when you have a defined contribution plan, you as the participant have a menu of investment options, and you have to look at those investment options. And not only do you have to decide, okay, how much do I need to come out of my paycheck so that I can have a substantial retirement that meets my financial needs, because everybody's financial needs are different. So what your percentage coming out of your paycheck is not going to be the same as mine. You also have to look at these, an industry average is 18 investment options, and figure out, number one, what does all of this mean? It's foreign language to a lot of people. And how in the world am I going to pick these? I would sit down with participants and I'd look at their enrollment forms sometime, and they'd do 1%, 1%, 1%, 1%. And I'm like, no, that's not how this is supposed to go. you need to, put 25% here or 50% here. You don't pick all of these. And now the industry has shifted to make it a little bit easier for participants with target date funds. So you have the option to, in that menu of investment choices, provide target date funds, which is based upon your targeted retirement date. So if you're young going into a new 401k, your 401k plan, and you're a new employee, you would pick the target date fund of 2060, because 2060 is when you're probably going to be closest to age 65 or when you're ready to retire. And at today's date, 2021, that 2060 fund is about 90% in stocks or equities. And as you get older, the glide path of that changes, meaning that they will slowly take out the equities and put fixed income in, which is a less riskier investment. And as you get to retirement, there's two options there. You can either have a to retirement fund or a to death fund. And if it's to retirement, they stop managing it at age 65. But if it's to death, they will manage it all the way through retirement.